All right, last lesson for the semester is the quadratic formula. Yay! It was one of my favorite formulas from Algebra 1. It's probably gonna be one of your least favorite formulas, but it's okay, I have enough enthusiasm for all of us. Okay, so what the quadratic formula is when you're solving trinomials, sometimes when you're trying to do all of the other methods that we've talked about, they don't work. They don't go in evenly. They're not working. Okay, well, you're trying to factor your trinomial. You can't find numbers that go in. That's where the quadratic formula comes in handy. The quadratic formula is used when all your other methods don't work. So here is your quadratic formula. Please learn to love and appreciate it as much as I love and appreciate it. Okay, it is x is equal to minus b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac, all divided by 2a. Now that b squared minus 4ac might look a little bit familiar because we talked about it. That is called the determinant, and it's actually thrown in here. So your terms a, b, and c are going to come from your quadratic formula. Remember, it's I'm going to write it in a different color. Actually, this is blue, and this next is purple. I don't know if you can tell. Y equals ax squared plus bx plus c. Okay, right here. A will go here and here. You'll plug in B to go here and here. You'll plug in C to go here. This is why I was so adamant on you guys learning which one was A, B, and C and pointing and like distinguishing A, B, and C, even though we never really use C very much. This is why I was preparing you for the quadratic formula. All right, so the quadratic formula is another method to solve quadratic equations. So I'm going to show you the steps, and I'm going to use an example to show you how to use a quadratic formula. All right. Step number 1. Make sure that your equation is set equal to 0 and written in standard form. So if you notice when I wrote up here, I wrote that in standard form because the quadratic equation, like if you have this in standard form, then you have A, B, and C. You do not want vertex form because then you have X, H, and K, and you want A, B, C. All right. So the example that we're going to be working with is x squared minus 5x minus 36 equals 0. Okay, so your first step, remember I write the words on the left. I show you where each step should end with the pink marker, and I show you this. Everything written in pencil is the work you should be doing. It's like the pencil is everything in between the lines. Okay, so your first step is to make sure your equation, are we in standard form? Yes, we have ax squared minus bx minus c. That's fine because our b's and c's are negative. That matches. And we have our equation equal to 0. That's step number 1. You have to make sure that is complete before you can move on to step number 2. Step number 2 is to identify A, B, and C. And since I can't write in italics, I'm going to put these in quotation marks so you can see that they're supposed to be something. So this is going to be step number 2. And this is something I've been teaching you guys for a while now. So you got to signify what is your A equal to, what is your B equal to, what is your C equal to. In this case, A is 1, B is a -5, and C is a -36. Okay, step 2 is complete. Step 3 says that you need to substitute these values into the formula and simplify. And simplify. 5. I'm sorry, spelling sometimes gets me. All right, what this means, I'm actually going to write this in pencil because I'm going to write the simplified version. Is you see this formula right here? I'm going to substitute each value. So everywhere I see a B, I'm going to place a -5. Everywhere I see an A, I'm going to place a 1. Everywhere I see, I'm going to place a negative. Everywhere I see a C, I'm going to place a -36. So it starts off being an x equals. At the beginning, you have -b. Okay, well, you want -b. Your b is a negative number. If your b is a negative number, you should have minus a negative number. Plus or minus, we've talked about what plus or minus means. We're going to have a square root. We're going to have b squared. Okay, so, but my b is -5, so I'm going to put -5 squared right there. -4 doesn't change. Okay, well, I need a. What's a? A is 1. I have c. C is -36. Okay, that's all divided by 2 times a. A is 1. And then we're going to slowly simplify it. So I'm going to start by simplifying a -5. That's going to be a +5. Plus or minus, we're still going to be under the square root. Okay, -5 squared is a +25. Minus 4 times 1 times a -36. You can actually start by going -4 times 1 times -36. That is going to give you a +144. Okay. And then that's going to be divided by, well, 2 times 1 is just 2. All right. So we've simplified nicely. Okay. The next thing would be to add these two numbers under the square root. So then that's going to be 5 plus or minus the square root of 25 plus 144. It's actually going to give you 169. And that's still being divided by 2. Okay, well then take the square root of 169. That's actually going to give you 13 divided by 2. Okay. Well then, we've learned that this means that we're going to do 5 plus 13 divided by 2 and 5 minus 13 divided by 2. Five plus 13 divided by 2 would give you 18 divided by 2, which gives you x is equal to 9. 5 minus 13 divided by 2 would give you -8. Yeah. -8 divided by 2, which gives you x equals a -4. Well, now that you have your two x equals values, all of this came down to be your very last step, your simplified version. Your answer is x equals -4, 9. All of your work is actually in your quadratic formula. Yeah, and actually, you could have gone from this step up here straight down to this step if you had your calculator and you'd put in, okay, well then what's a -5? Okay, well that's a +5. Okay, well then what's -5 squared minus 4ac? You would have gotten 169, which is right here. You could have asked, yeah, you could have jumped down here, and then you still need to keep that plus or minus, and then taken the square root of 169 to give you 13, and then you still need to split it up into 5 plus 13 and 5 minus 13, because that's what that plus or minus means. It means you can take the positive version of this, or you can take the negative version of this. All right, so one example that we're going to do in this form before we talk about irrational solutions, because if you're working with square roots, there's a very high possibility that it's going to be an irrational solution. Okay, this is going to be number 7 in your notes. It's x squared plus 7x equals x minus 10. First things first that I want you to note. Well, first things first. Your first step says to make sure that your equation is written. Your equation is set equal to 0, so you have your trinomial on one side and 0 on the other, and you have to be in standard form. This is not true of this because we have all this on the side, and no. So we're going to subtract by x and add by 10 on both sides, which you can actually do at one time. Or you could have subtracted by x first and then added by 10. This just saves you some time. I'm sorry, I'm a little bit OCD. There we go. Okay. Well, this would give you x squared. 7x minus x is going to give you a negative or a positive 6x. And then plus 10 equals 0 because this is canceled out to 0. All right, step 1 complete. Step 2, identify your A, B, and C. And I'm going to write these off to the side. Your A is 1, your B is 6, and your C is 10. Okay? And then the last step is to substitute these values into your quadratic equation and simplify. Okay, your quadratic equation says minus b, well, x equals minus b, plus or minus the square root of b squared, minus 4 times a times c, all divided by 2 times a. All right, so then next step would be to simplify some of this. Okay, so negative 6 is going to stay as negative 6, plus or minus the square root. 6 squared is going to give you 36. Negative 4 times 1 times 10 is going to give you minus 40. And then this is all going to be divided by 2 times 1 is 2. Okay. Okay then. So the next thing would be to do 36 minus 40, which is going to give you negative 6 plus or minus the square root of negative 4 divided by 2. Well, then the next thing would be to take the square root of a negative 4. Oh, wait, you can't. Well, you can, but if you recall from a couple sections ago, taking the square root of a negative number gives you an imaginary number. But here in Algebra 1, we've been working with only real numbers. So when you get to the point where you have the square root of a negative number, and if you try and put that in the calculator, it's going to throw you back the error non-real numbers. You can go ahead and assume and deduct that your answer is going to be no solution. And remember, I didn't say that you can never take the square root of a negative number, because you can. You're just going to get an imaginary number. And we're going to save that for a little bit later on. Right now, I want you to just grasp the basics of the quadratic formula. So if it asks you for all real solutions and you got to the square root of a negative number, you would go straight to no solutions because you have no real solutions. Okay, let's flip over to the back real fast. Okay, and let's talk about some more irrational solutions. Like I said, if we're going to be dealing with the square root, you're going to have some irrational solutions. Simple as that. Not every number is going to be a perfect square. So we're going to start it off easy with number 9. X squared plus 4x plus 1 equals 0. Step 1 is complete. This is equal to 0. Yay. Step 2, identify A, B, and C. A is 1, B is 4, C is 1. Step 3, plug it into this quadratic equation. X equals minus B plus or minus the square root of B squared minus 4AC, all divided by 2A. Okay, and then solve. Well, simplifying this, it's be negative 4 plus or minus the square root. 4 squared is 16. Negative 4 times 1 times 1, that's still minus 4, all divided by 2. Okay. 16 minus 4 is actually going to give you 12. And the square root of 2 is any irrational number. If you try to take it, it'll give you a long decimal with no patterns. A never-ending decimal with no patterns. Okay, but if you notice 12 is not prime, so let's look at the factors of 12. 12 can be broken into 4 times 3. Ha ha ha, there it is. 4 is a perfect square. So it doesn't matter even if they're under square roots, it still works out that way. You can break the square root of 12 into the square root of 4 times the square root of 3, which would then be 2 square roots of 3. So rewriting the square root of 12 plus or minus 2 square roots of 3, all divided by 2. Okay. Something right here is we have a 4 here, we have a 2 here, and we have a 2. We can simplify these. So if the number outside of your square root, the number in front of the plus or minus, and the number at the bottom all have something in common, you can simplify this. So they're all even numbers, so you can actually factor out a 2 in each one of these, and you're just going to end up with negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. And remember, you want to simplify this as much as you can. And you would leave it right here. You can't do anything else. So this would just be x equals negative 2 plus or minus the square root of 3. That's it. That's the end of that. Okay, we're going to do one more that does not simplify very well. We're going to do, number 12. 4x squared minus 7x equals a negative 2. First step, is it complete? In this case, it is not, because you do not have a standard form trinomial equal to 0. You have it equal to negative 2. So first things first is we're going to add by 2 on both sides. And this is going to give us 4x squared minus 7x plus 2 equals 0. Okay, now our first step is complete, so we can move on to our second, which is to identify A, B, and C. A in this case is 4, B is negative 7, and C is a positive 2. Okay, then plug it all into the quadratic formula. So x is going to equal minus b. If your b is negative, you do still have to write negative. You do have to write your negative 7 in parentheses with a subtraction outside of it. All this negative sign is doing, this minus b is just saying that we're going to change the sign of b that when we put it into here. So plus or minus the square root of b squared. Remember, negative numbers squared have to be in parentheses. Okay, minus 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is a positive 2, all divided by 2 times a, which is 8. Okay. So then this is going to give you a positive 7 plus or minus the square root of negative 7 squared is going to give you a positive 49 minus negative 4 times a positive 4 is going to give you a negative 16 times positive 2 is going to give you a negative 32. And this is all still being divided by 2 times 8. Oh, I got ahead of myself. A was 4. 2 times 4 is 8. I have a tendency to do that. My mind has a tendency to skip. Okay. All right, so you'd have had 2 times A is 4, 2 times 4 is 8, okay? Now we're gonna do 49 minus 32, so that's gonna be 7 plus or minus the square root of 49 minus 32 is 17. All divided by the 8. Okay, well 17 is actually a prime number and it's an irrational number. The only factors of 17 are 1 in itself, which is a definition of being prime. So you can't simplify that anymore. That's as simplified as it's going to go. So your answer would be 7 plus or minus the square root of 17 over 8. Because of the fact that there's no number outside of the square root, which is just 1, you can't simplify anything else either, like we did with the previous one. So sometimes you're going to be able to simplify them and knock out the fraction. Sometimes you can't, and it'll just stay as a fraction. But that's it. That's your quadratic formula.